I am Gadadhar Misra. I teach mathematics at Indian Institute of Science. I have heard of Professor Raghunathan. He has been of great influence to a lot of people in the way one looks at mathematics. Now I have had the opportunity to work on several committees with him. The ICM was one of the most successful and large events that was conducted by him, and I certainly joined him in sort of taking care of several little things. And therefore, I have been learning a lot of things from him in terms of where mathematics is going in India and perhaps what one should do to help achieve a greater sort of quality and standards for the generations to come, younger people who are doing mathematics today. And therefore, it is of course very important to have his views on record rather than just individuals getting to learn from him.
So you had many students over the years. How do you choose a suitable research problem? It seems
well. It's in fact I don't have an answer for that. It's been more or less an accident, the kind of problems I've chosen for a student, and sometimes I have not chosen the problem for the student chose the problem himself or herself. So it's a little difficult to be sure. The one case where for example, where I gave a definite problem is that of Rajan, where I suggested a problem very clearly. But I didn't do it in your case. I didn't do it in the case of Gopal Prasad. As a matter of fact, I had some ideas about kind of thing that Gopal Prasad can be asked to do, but ultimately what he wrote up as his thesis had nothing to do with that problem. He did work on that problem for a while, but it had nothing to do with that problem. And similarly with Dani. Dani chose his own thesis problem. I was assisting him at a later point. So one case again is Vinay Devdar, where I specifically posed the problem for him. It so turned out at that time I was working on the congruent subgroup problem, and it occurred to me that reading Calvin Moore's paper, it occurred to me that it could be done for the quasi-separate case, which is what I suggested as a problem for Devdar. That's it. In most cases, the problem came of its own during discussions with the student perhaps, and sometimes not even that. In your own case, in fact, I did suggest the problem. In fact, I was abroad at the time when I think Gopal Prasad suggested the problem too. Though it should have occurred to me to suggest that problem, it did not. But it so happened some discussions emerged, with Gopal Prasad in this case. With Dani, again, what had happened was that he had essentially found the problem himself, but I had to give a little direction which made all the difference for the thesis, because originally what he first planned to write up as a thesis, it turned out was practically contained in the paper which he had been reading, from which he took the thing. Though he has not explicitly, the author had not explicitly stated it. So I had to give it a kind of twist which made a problem available. But in most cases, it's more something coming out of discussions with the student, and sometimes simply the student thought of it himself, or with the help of somebody else. I had no direct link with. There are other cases where I have such the problem, but unfortunately the student didn't complete the work, did not do the degree.
From what I understand, not being at TIFR, there were no formal courses for the PhD students. Perhaps only very recently, now there are actual formal courses that students take.
In those days, it's almost up to 80. There was no graduate school as such.
That's right.
Everybody the graduate school appeared in 82.
That's right.
And I think, or even later, 82 is when.
Perhaps later. 82.
Rajan's batch onwards.
Rajan joined the graduate school.
Yeah.
And in many cases, the students, there was no graduate school, and the students were not told that they have to register at any particular time and so on. It's a kind of nebulous thing.
Right.
And some people simply registered, some people didn't, and went on for a long time. In fact, in some cases, I know people didn't even register for 10 years after they joined the institute.
Right.
That's in the older days. But after the graduate school started, then of course they started giving systematic courses and things like that.
So my question is, as an advisor, how do you ensure that the students that work with you sort of get to know certain chunk of mathematics?
The thing is, there were no formal graduate courses,
Right.
but there were always courses available, and some students would take the courses, and slowly it will work. I mean, for instance, I myself gave a course on discrete groups, which is not described as a graduate course at all, but in fact, it was the same course I repeated at Yale the next year, where it was called a graduate course.
Right.
So here, the graduate course was being given, but people are not told you attend this so that you can work on this. That kind of thing was not done.
So
it was much more informal.
So in the absence of that data of no courses and so on, someone comes up to you and says he or she would like to work with you. How do you make up your mind that it might be a good fit?
In my own case, I used to be in contact with all the students. So I knew roughly what was happening to them, who was doing what and things like that. And so somebody came to me and wanted to work with me, I would know. And I would never turn down anybody who wanted to work with me.
That was my point. So you have never turned down anybody?
I have never turned down anybody who wanted to work with me.
I see. But then, do you have any recollection of how much time in terms of having to spend more time with someone, less time with somebody, people being more independent, leaving them alone, whereas in some other cases you thought you need to work harder?
Yeah, it's highly variable. Of course, all the better students depended very little on me. They were on their own, essentially working away. All that I did was to give some broad directions, and that's about the only thing I did. But some of the weaker students, yes, I've had to.
So you were aware of the kind of time that you might have to spend with your student.
Yeah. But I generally, whether I'm guiding a students or not, I like to spend time with students.
Right.
So it was all not done. It was never done consciously.
Right.
I used to spend a lot of time with the students at the tea table, for instance, talking about various things. Not always mathematics, of course, but anyway.
So one last question in this connection. Typically, someone like you, let's say from another department of comparable repute, would have had many more students, because in typical American universities, the intake is a lot more. Have you ever regretted that you didn't have a much larger pool of students?
I never thought along those lines. I was happy enough to have students here. I was one of the people who had more students than other faculty members at this institute. And I didn't particularly feel the need for taking more students.
But what about the school, School of Mathematics as a whole? Because having very few students from TIFR has been a criticism of the rest of the...
Yes, the problem is depends on TIFR very choosy about the students. They wanted the quality. People who were really inclined towards mathematics and who really had some talent for mathematics. When you look for that, we selected whoever we could. There's no ceiling on the number of students we could take.
Right.
The ceiling was decided by the quality. So unfortunately, in the old days, the number of students we could who would qualify, even minimal tests, were not so large.
Right.
And probably it continues to this day. It's not that large.
No, the numbers have increased.
Numbers have increased, but it's highly. In the earlier days, 5 students is about the maximum you would get. Even if you relax and say, okay, we'll take whoever is reasonable and so on, whatever. That's all we were doing, matter of fact. And half a dozen was always a bumper crop.
But do you think that the fact that the PhD student fellowships or scholarships have gone up substantially, and as a result, perhaps the number of students who choose to do something like mathematics has gone up?
I don't know about that. See, the point is that scholarships may have gone up, but salaries in other areas of other professions have also gone up correspondingly. It's not as if this has gone up while the others have not. So I don't think the number of students coming to this is, if it's larger, it is not due to the fact that salaries are better. I don't think so. Though salaries, of course, are better. When I joined the Tata Institute, it was 250 rupees a month.
Right. Yeah.
Now what is it now?
It's 25,000 rupees to begin with, 24,000 rupees as a junior research fellow, 26 or 27,000 rupees as a senior.
100-fold.
Huh?
100-fold increase.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, it's 1960, so it's more than 50 years.
Right.
It's a 100-fold increase.
Right. No, I believe that there are more students. I was only curious what contributes to it. I mean, whether even the body of mathematics.
Even now, the number of students is what at Tata Institute, about a dozen?
Per year, maybe 8 to 9, I think.
So it's not all that big.
Yeah, but so that is bigger in Tata Institute perhaps by a lesser quantum, but if you look at Indian Statistical Institute and Indian Institute of Science and many other Institute of Mathematical Sciences, everybody has added to the
So one of the things that's happened over the years, the perception of science as a profession is much more widespread.
That's right.
That's one of the reasons why it's there. But apart from that, I don't know if...
Right.
And also I think the other thing is that despite the fact that our universities and colleges have not been doing too well, the number of good students seems to be, number of students who are competent coming out of our system seems to have increased.
Yeah.
Of course, the total number going into the system has increased considerably.
Right.
So it's only reasonable that it should, there should be some increase. It's not, I don't think it's proportional, but anyway.
Right. So continuing with the students and the environment in the Tata Institute, I believe that when you first came, as you said, 250 rupees is what people got around those days. But then what was it like to be a student at the Tata Institute?
It was wonderful. It was, it's an experience which one of the most pleasant experiences which I cherish all of my life. I don't know if you have seen this book called The Brighter Than a Thousand Suns by Robert Jung.
Yes.
There is a chapter on Göttingen in between the war years in Göttingen. The chapter is headed The Beautiful Years. And that description of Göttingen at that time, I think applied to Tata Institute in the 1950s and 60s when I was a student there. It's a wonderful place. There's a lot of excitement in the air and lots of students. Everybody is serious about science. At the same time, they were not. People didn't take themselves seriously. It's not as if there were serious blokes sitting around, but they took their science seriously. But they had lots of fun, and learning was fun.
Right.
There's no question about that. And there's an informal year. In fact, when I first went abroad, and I went abroad only as a teacher. I went to my first job as I didn't go as a student, but I saw what's happening to students around. I think the students here had a much better exposure to their teachers than the kind of things that would happen, for instance, at Yale when I was visiting there. The teachers had the students here had much better access to faculty than people abroad in the graduate schools in various universities.
Right.
That's my impression, for instance. And we were, what should I say? The whole lot of us were a cheerful lot, and there was a lot of fun going around. And people had, unlike what most outsiders believe, scientists can have a good sense of humor.
That's right.
The science students could have a good sense of humor, and we enjoyed ourselves thoroughly.
But what about living conditions and
we were put up at the hostel in Old Yacht Club, as the building used to be called. The hostel was actually used to be the servants' quarters of the Old Yacht Club. It was converted into students' hostel.
Right.
It's a terrible place to live in. But it didn't seem to matter. It was uncomfortable, but we were not unhappy. The kind of creature comforts that we demanded in those days was probably no great thing. It was actually the conditions were pretty awful looking back. There were bed bugs, there were cockroaches, rats running around. People have got bitten by rats.
Right.
That was bitten off by rats and things that kind. Students such things have happened to students. In fact, when I was an intermediate in Bengaluru, I studied at a hostel of the St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru. It's a far superior hostel than accommodation than what I had here.
Right.
At the age of 1920, the Tata Institute. It was really a terrible place. Water supply was very bad. Toilets were always dirty because there's no water, and that kind of situation.
Right.
And also, food was a major problem because when I first joined, there was a canteen which was run by a private contractor in the institute, which is where we used to eat both in the evenings and mornings. And at some point, the contractor raised his rates, and the students went on protest, and he shut down and quit. And we had to fend for ourselves eating in restaurants all over Kolaba. That was not a pleasant experience. But despite all that, we were not an unhappy lot. Most of us were a happy lot.
So, yeah. What are the courses that you can remember that were offered around that time?
Well, you see, in my first year, no courses were offered. The point was I was the only student who joined, and it didn't make sense to have a course for a single student. However, they were conducting courses for teachers from Bombay University colleges who wanted to improve themselves for such, and those courses I had a chance to attend. But those courses were kind of a little different because the end attempt was not so much to give an exam and judge and things like that. So there were no exams at that point because it was meant for college teachers and so on. But these courses were not of that kind, and I did not. But I had access to my fellow students and also the faculty. I mean, there were very few people who could be called faculty at that time, but I had free access to them, and they were very helpful. And they told me what to study and so on, and I picked up books from the library, and I enjoyed reading. There's no problem.
Since you mentioned fellow students, who were the fellow students?
The first year, of course, everyone was senior to me, and the fellow student, I mean, some of them were only fellow students in name. I mean, in formally speaking, for instance, there's Raghavan Narasimhan, who had already done some beautiful pieces of work in mathematics, and who knew as much mathematics as any faculty member anywhere, kind of thing. And then there was C P Ramanujan, an equally outstanding man, but who had not done any research work by then, but then who knew a hell of a lot of mathematics. And there was Ramanan. These are people from whom I learnt a lot of mathematics. Then there was someone by the name of Gauri Shankaran, who was very helpful. I mean, coming from Chennai, which is at that time at best an overgrown village. Bombay was a little different, and this man put me at ease. And he came from the same college from which I came, and he took a special interest in me and put me at ease, and that was very nice of him. But I didn't learn. He also taught me some mathematics, but the people from whom I benefited most these were the fellow students who were essentially should have been considered faculty, though they were not yet. Barring Narasimhan, the other two had not even done any research, but nevertheless they knew a lot of mathematics and they learned a great deal from them.
So when did you decide to work with Professor Nasuma?
It all happened very informally. Basically, in my second year, I attended a seminar on differential geometry. Towards the end of the year, Narasimhan discussed some questions with me, some problems with me, and somewhere during the middle of the third year, he proposed a problem for me, and there was no question of, he was not recognized as a guide formally, no. I had not registered, for instance. So he said some problem, and I didn't take it so seriously because it's a problem of differential geometry, and at that time I was keen on working in topology, and in any case, I wanted to learn a lot more mathematics. I was always greatly interested in acquiring a tremendous amount of scholarship. I admired people who knew a lot, and so I wanted to do that, and I was not going into the problem immediately. But he would keep on asking me every now and then what happened to the problem. At some point, I thought about the problem, and I could get something in a special case very quickly, within a month or so. But I didn't tell him that because I thought that was not sufficiently interesting. I let go of that, but then he would come again and again. At some point, I said, I will tell him this is what I have done, but I told him it's not particularly interesting, but I can do it in this particular case. He jumped, he said, that's good, it's good enough for a thesis. So I was very pleasant. I have always had the good luck of underestimating or
Your
rather
own-
estimating it below what other people
Right.
thought of whatever I did, and it happened with the thesis. And after that, I registered.
I see. Yeah.
And something strange happened because I had this so-called honors degree, not a master's degree. The honors degree was not recognized by
Bombay.
University as master's degree. It only considers a bachelor's degree, and then you have to you can submit your thesis only after 3 years. If it's a master's degree, you can submit in 3 years, 2 years, but this was 3 years. And then Narasimhan wrote them a letter saying that because he had already spent 2 years, the Tata Institute should be considered as done something, so he should be allowed to submit in 2 years.
So
They agreed to that, but wrote a stiff letter. This as a one-time we are applying this, will not be done in future.
Well, but of course we are talking about early years in Tata Institute. So after that, I mean, after finishing your PhD, you went away, I think, for a
In
for a
fact,
while.
my first trip abroad was before because I had done my necessary work in '63,
Right.
and already in '64 January there was an international colloquium. And once again, I was surprised because I was asked to give a talk at the colloquium. Obviously, my work was estimated much more highly by others than I did myself. So I was asked to give a talk in the colloquium, and that talk went off quite well. And thanks largely to Chandrasekharan, with whom I had very little contact, except that he made me rehearse my talk.
I see.
I had been asked to give a talk, and never before had I given a talk in any forum. And in any case, I had given a few lectures at the Tata Institute in student seminars of some kind, where apparently I did a pretty bad job, and I was not considered a good teacher, good lecturer at all. So he insisted that I should rehearse it with him, and he gave me excellent tips. And I gave a good lecture by all accounts, and that is largely thanks to him. Narasimhan also sat with him when I rehearsed it, because Chandrasekharan did not understand the mathematics I was doing. Narasimhan is the one who did that. But he gave me very relevant, important tips, and you asked me to say, slow down, explain that better, and things of that kind. So it was a very good experience for me, and I gave a good talk there. And the first trip abroad I made was in '65. Out of the blue came an invitation from Grenoble. I later learnt what happened was that Raghunathan had talked to someone in Grenoble and suggested that they invite me there, which they did. I went there for 2 months, 3 months. So things came to me in some sense totally unexpectedly, and I went there. I spent 3 months there, and I realized at that point of time, I began becoming more conscious of. So I realized that I was a lot better than the students there. I mean, I had no interaction with the students there. I was still a student, but I could see that they knew much less mathematics than I did, and so on. And I realized that Tata Institute is probably it's an outstanding place. It seemed better than Grenoble in any case, the University of Grenoble to which I went. And that visit was very useful to me for two things. Firstly, I was very much interested in topology, but topology was making tremendous progress, and one was not getting papers get published 2 years after the work is done and so on. So those things were not coming very easily, and even papers are there, the journals are there. To read the journals in the library is not always easy experience, and so. But there, I could Xerox papers from journals, which was not possible in Bombay.
Right.
In Grenoble, it could be done. In fact, I Xeroxed half a dozen papers in topology and studied them and found that I could understand them. I always was a little scared of all the recent developments in topology, which I thought would not be accessible to me. But when I actually Xeroxed the papers and started reading them, and I could understand everything. And it gave me a boost to my confidence, immense boost to my confidence. And when I came back, I kept these Xerox copies for ages with me for many years. But now they have disappeared. I don't know where they are.
There is this model where I think in Tata Institute, although you keep calling yourself a student, there was some sort of job or something, right? When PhD students
Actually, we were all called research assistants.
Right, exactly.
We were called research, and it was a scale, and your increments every year
That's
and so
right.
on.
So
And but you were essentially a student for several years.
That's right, yeah.
And during that period, if your progress is not considered satisfactory, they would stop your increment.
right.
And such things would happen.
Yeah.
But one joined here to do research. One did not think
that it was a job.
One did not think it was a job, and I mean, one thought it was a job, but the job was to do research, and you didn't have to register. I mean, nobody asked you to register. In fact, most people registered in those days only after they wrote their first paper.
Yeah, but my question is now, first of all, this practice has been stopped. This is no longer true. PhD students don't come here with an increment, this, that, regular.
Right.
The other thing is, there is a big debate, I believe, all over the world as to whether, you start somewhere and you continue to be there. In India, for example, many institutes almost as a rule not hire their own students, or at least ensure they go away for a very, very long time before. TIFR is an exception, to some extent even IAS is an exception, but this is a debate. I would like to know, first of all, this practice being stopped, what do you think of it, and where are you on this debate?
This practice is no longer extant in TIFR, it's over now. Yeah. People are asked to go out, very, very exceptional cases, which happens also abroad for instance. Right. But anyway, the point is that the old days, the thing is that the number of people who were competent mathematicians was so small that there is no choice for Tata Institute except to continue them on their faculty.
Right.
The good ones, they simply, whoever did a good thesis, they continued in faculty. But they need not be promoted. For a long time, promotions were based on whether you were doing good research or not. Otherwise, for instance, somebody has stayed as a fellow and retired as a fellow. Such things have happened in the past.
Right.
That doesn't happen any longer because now, of course, it's a graduate school and you are asked to go out, and if you are rehired, then of course the first job is a 5-year contract, but then later on, if you are given tenure, then of course usually promotions take place at steady intervals, and that's the way it was.
Right.
The old days that was not the case.
Right.
There were people who stagnated in quotes for 20 years in the same grade without any question. That had happened in the past, and that is because once you are, I mean, the point is this. In fact, in the early days, every job was a 5-year contract, including that of the senior professors and things that kind.
Right.
But the decision makers didn't sack themselves. That's all. So the contracts were never terminated. That once you were a decision maker, you were not terminated. But at lower levels, contracts have been terminated and people have been asked to go out. At some point, people went to court.
Exactly.
And that is when the Tata Institute decided to shift to the graduate school. And they first did it with physics. And in fact, mathematicians continued to resist. Physics people did it in 73 or 74 or something. But the mathematics did it only in 82. It resisted. And the point was that till that time, till the 70s, the practice was not, it seemed to work all right. It didn't seem to make positive problems. But in the 70s, when people went to court and so on, that's when it was realized that you must probably have some kind of check. I'm not sure. In the old days, that the old system worked well enough. And of course, at that time, it was probably the right thing to do because there were people who had become outstanding scholars, but were not producing so-called original research in a big way. Should Tata Institute ask them to go? It's not clear at that time, because if they go, the atmosphere will become that much poorer, because you need to have good scholars around to promote good research as well. So if you don't have good scholars around, it's not going to work very well as a feeling.
So this is a good point for you, with all your experience, to say, I mean, how does one really evaluate research? Now you talked about scholarship, having those people around. On the other hand, there has been always, again, this big debate. Somebody writes papers. The papers may not be fundamental in nature. The papers may make only incremental progress, but that's counted in some way in your favor. Whereas people who spend a long time studying something, and like you said earlier, what they produce, they perhaps think often is not good enough. Why should it be even put on public record? So these people stop from publishing a lot of stuff. How do you evaluate them?
No, it's obviously a very tricky question. The
Yeah.
thing is that evaluation of scholarship is a very difficult business. But the evaluation of scholarship will often have to be based on some subjective criteria. You cannot really say somebody is a scholar, how do you do that? I mean, of course, one way, of course, if the person writes books, then probably something will come through. But it's much more subtle. The whole thing is a scholar. You write
Lectures.
It can be arid scholarship, which you may write a big book which contains all the information and so on, but you may not be able to convey the right ideas and excitement to the people. There were people who were doing that, who could do that, but nevertheless were not producing so-called research, original research which can be published and stuff of that kind.